All right, welcome folks. I'm going to do you can call it a tutorial if that's what you want to call it. I mean, you may or may not learn something from this. There are many of you out there that do this that are much better than I and more experienced and certainly have better seeing conditions. I'm at not a super high latitude, but fairly high, and I live in the northern hemisphere. And during our summer, when the Earth's northern hemisphere is tilted towards the sun, well, guess what? That means at night we are tilted away from the equatorial plane. So that puts Saturn and Jupiter and the other planets, namely the outer planets, I guess, at a low elevation. So I look through a lot more atmosphere than a lot of you folks out there. So this won't end up in the best final result, but that's not the purpose of this. The purpose is just to do a capture video. So I use SharpCap. Primarily, I've used fire capture, and it's got the auto tracking feature, which I think is awesome. There is an experimental tool in SharpCap that does the same thing. I've called it up, but I couldn't get it to work, and so I figured, maybe it's not ready to go yet. But I predominantly use SharpCap, so that's what I'm going to walk through. I do like SharpCap Pro, again, mainly because of the auto tracking feature, and it also has the self-centering feature in there too as well, but I don't find the interface that user friendly. And again, maybe I haven't spent enough time with it, and I find the interface for SharpCap Pro much better. By the way, SharpCap and SharpCap Pro has a bunch of additional tools. Predominantly, it's got the polar alignment tool, which I use on an equatorial scope, German equatorial mount, and it's really nice. So that's why I pay the $10 a year to get the Pro version. So I've already got my camera set up. If you want to look at the setup that I use in terms of camera, focuser, telescope, how I arrange my equipment, etc., you can go to the video on this channel that talks about Planetary setup. So I've got my ASI 290 already connected, so I'm going to go ahead and connect to that camera. And we have Jupiter. Well, Jupiter is already there. Let me set this up, though. I'm going to go a little bit out of focus. In fact, I'm going to go way out of focus. Like so, where you can't see squat. Now, Jupiter happened to pop up right in the field of view there, so the scope is tracking real nice. One of the things I do after I slew to the planet is that I will center it in my finder scope in the crosshairs, because I've got crosshairs in my finder scope. Then I look in a normal eyepiece, a medium power eyepiece, and I make sure that the planet or the target, whatever it is that we're shooting that night, is centered in the eyepiece. Then I will remove the eyepiece and put in the camera in the Barlow. Right now I've got the ASI 290 with a 2X Barlow. And typically what you'll see on the screen here when I call up the camera is exactly what you'll see. You don't see anything. Now, perhaps somewhere in this field of view, I have got Jupiter captured in here somewhere in this field of view. I don't know. So what we don't want to do is try to find Jupiter with a small field of view, like 320 or ROI. That's another term, region of interest, which is the technical term. You can call it field of view. But we don't want to try to hunt down Jupiter somewhere in this narrow field of view. So we want to go just as wide as our camera will let us. Then we want to turn up the exposure real crazy, and even the gain. Now, this isn't not what we're going to capture with, but this tells us that, hey, Jupiter, our target's in there somewhere. You see I got a couple of dust specks in here I'm going to have to clean off. So it just so happens that Jupiter is right in the middle, generally speaking, in our field of view. If not, I would have to go back to my finder scope, put the target in the crosshairs, and make sure that the tracking's still good, and put the white blob in my field of view here. But now that I've got Jupiter, it appears anyway in here, I'm going to loosen the two set screws on my Barlow lens. That's where the Barlow lens goes into the focus tube. Now I have the ZWO AEF, but I don't know how much travel is going to be required to bring this thing into focus. So I'm going to physically move the Barlow lens in and out of the focuser tube to get focus fairly close. So you're going to see a lot of movement here. So I'm doing the screws right now. Looks like I need to come out a little bit. So there's all that movement. That's why I like using the AEF, so I can avoid that movement. Yeah, it's a little bit better. I don't want to get too far out because I don't want that Barlow lens to be twisted at all or bending in the focuser tube. So I've got it roughly there. Now again, I've got the ZWAF, so I'm going to go to the fast mode and just focus until I get a little bit sharper edge on this. I'm not going to see detail yet. There's a fairly sharp edge. So now I'm going to go to my exposure. I'm going to lower that to around 5. That's typically around 3 to 5 is what I set for my exposure. Now I'm going to lower the gain. Sure enough, there's some cloud bands. There's the great red spot. Now, I don't like taking pictures of the planets, well, Saturn and Jupiter, with the bands going in the vertical, right? Because that's not how the thing is in reality. So I at least turn the camera to rotate these bands to get into the horizontal. So now I'm going to loosen the set screw that holds the camera itself. There's going to be movement. I'm going to rotate it until I get the picture I want. There's the moons. That makes sense. They're also in the plane. There we go. So I like that better. I also like to call up the crosshairs right here. Now again, if you'll go to my Planetary setup video, one of the things I talk about is where I have the hand controller. I've extended the cable for that hand controller, and it is extended all the way from the mount onto a working table. And again, I'm not going to show you here in the dark, but I am now going to use that hand controller that's Velcroed right here by my laptop to, let me slow these slew rates down some, to center the target in the crosshairs. I'm going to release the button just prior to the crosshairs because I know due to backlash it's going to drift a little bit. Man, up and down as fast. Let's bring it back to the right some. Come on, I mean left. There we go. See what happens. Rate. Let's go to 4. Let's go a little bit more. All I'm doing is just messing with the hand controller. Now I am running the ASCOM driver here, and I can connect to my telescope and get my little, virtual control pad here to fine tune this. But for some reason, and there's a trick to doing this, and I can't remember what it is right now. For some reason, it is not finding my COM port. There should be COM port 3 dropping down there, and there's known issues with this, and I forgot what the trick is. I can't remember if you have it. You got to have everything hooked up when you power up the scope or what, but maybe some of you all can provide inputs for that. But I do have the focuser connected here, so I can control the focuser through the laptop, or I can do it through the hand controller that comes with that focuser, and that's what I have in front of me too as well. So let me recenter this a little bit. All right, so now with the 2x Barlow in and my ASI 290, I think I get a pretty good field of view. So now I'm going to go to the fine adjustment on the hand controller for the focuser, and I'm just looking at this, trying to pull up some details, and it's going to be very limited on what I can get just due to scene conditions here where I live. And we've got the wildfire smoke that I know some of you have been dealing with as well. So that's not too bad in terms of focus. Some of your all's images I've seen that are just phenomenal. There's a guy lives in Curacao that just gets phenomenal pictures. You guys have seen his images. Drew Henry's another one in Texas. He gets some really good images. And if I know I'm missing some of your all's names, so forgive me. But I'm just kind of going back and forth on focus. Try to get some good details here. And that's not bad. Let's see if we can up the exposure just a little bit, drop the gain, maybe get a few more details to see the tracking jumping around a little bit. Now that I have Jupiter centered in my field of view, or ROI, I'm going to narrow that down some now. Let's go 600 by 600 and see what that looks like. And over here, I can drag this around to center the target. Now, to center the target, if I had to drag it all the way down here in the corner, then I may want to go back to a large ROI, or field of view, and recenter Jupiter again. Because of any drift, I don't have much play now for drift. If it drifts this way, then I'm done because I can't slew this over to stay caught up with Jupiter. By the way, notice I can come over here and left click and drag it manually, or I can use the pan left, right, and tilt up and down to fine tune where that goes. And if the tracking's not on any particular night, I click these all the time while I'm recording. So notice here, I will capture in RAW. Now you have an option here. You can go RAW 8, RAW 16, mono, no, RGB 24, space, because we're going to capture in the SEER file. I recommend SEER files. It's got more data capability, plus it's timestamps, plus it's WinJuPost compatible. If I go RAW 16, that means each pixel is recording up to 16 bits of data in terms of color. That's a lot. That's what, 3 million colors that could be represented by a single pixel. Jupiter's not going to have that, and certainly your eye is not going to catch it. But it's a lot of work for the processor. So your frame rate, which you can see right now, which is at 59 frames per second, and we're not capturing yet, we're just previewing, but you can see at 59 frames per second, when we're capturing 16 bits deep worth of color. Watch what happens when we go to RAW 8. Look at the frame per second now. More than double, just a little over double, which makes sense because we cut the pixel depth by half, right? We went from 16 bits to 8. Notice how the target's drifting downwards just a little bit. So next time I recenter this in my field of view, I may want to center it a little bit higher. Look, it's got a lot of drifts. You know how the scopes do this. I don't know why they do this sometimes. And of course, now it's stopping. Frustrating at times when we recenter this. All I did was change field of view and it started doing something weird. If you ever see heavy drift suddenly out of nowhere, check your mount, make sure it's not bumping into anything. I've got the wheelbarrow type wheels on the back and the handles on the front. One time, my target just started slewing off the screen and I couldn't figure out what was going on. I tried to compensate with the hand controller, and it turns out the wheelbarrow wheels on the back were hitting up against my table, and I did not know that. So now the scope can't turn to compensate for the Earth's rotation. It's one of those lessons learned. So back to our settings here as I recenter Jupiter. So with that kind of approximately centered, I'm going to go RAW 8. I'm capturing in SEER. I can come up here and give it a target name. I can call it Jup 2X, which means 2X Barlow. And already, SharpCap Pro will build a capture filter on your desktop. All right, so we're 12 minutes, 42 seconds into this, and we haven't captured a thing yet. So now I'm going to go back to 600 by 600. I'm going to center this up, look down at my frame rate. Yeah, we're about where we were earlier. Now, can I make the frame smaller? Certainly. So let's try, 480 by 480 and see what we get. Got it centered up. I can work on a little bit of focus. I have a second garage that I keep my equipment in, and it's certainly warmer in there than it is out here at this high latitude. So there are some temperature changes that are occurring in my scope. If I were to do this properly, I would have brought the scope out at least an hour earlier. So I'm going to grab the hand controller here on this ZWO-AEF and just see if I can get a little more focus out of this, a little more detail. That's not bad. I can call up the focuser ASCOM driver and look at my position, 39-11, and note that if I wanted to take some notes on what a good focus position is. This focuser has about 1 second of backlash, so I have to hold the button, and after a 1 second count, I know I've got movement. So I'm still messing around with focus. Some of you guys get just unbelievable focus. It's just phenomenal. So that's all I'm doing, focusing. Again, I don't expect stellar details and a stellar final product because I just don't have the seeing conditions here. All right, see if we can minimize this. Let's see if we can just up the gain a little bit. Maybe lower the exposure. Nope, I'd rather have a longer exposure because that gets details. Gain is an artificiality. You can jump online and read about it. It makes the pixels, in a way, it doesn't make them more sensitive to light, but it runs an algorithm through the data once it's dumped from the sensor. And basically, imagine, if you remember from mathematics, multiplying an array by some value, right? So if you have 2x2 array, and each element in that array has a value of 3, and we multiply the whole array by 2. Now every value in that 2x2 array is 6. So that's kind of what gain does in these cameras. It just simply multiplies a value across the sensor to increase the value of each pixel, the captured data. But it's not real data, right? If that makes sense. So I prefer a slightly higher exposure rate over just jumping up the gain, but I'm also cognizant of my frames per second down here, and 152 is not bad. So with that being said, let's see if I can bump the gain just a little bit. I tend to find that a perfectly illuminated image, or a preview here in SharpCap, in other words, hey, this looks bright enough to get details, etc. I find that once I go and I do all my post-processing, the image is a little bit dimmer than what I recall seeing during the capture. So my technique is to go a little bit lighter than I am normally comfortable with on my exposure/gain settings, and then it turns out the final image is kind of what I want. So I'm going to do a recenter. It's kind of drifting to the bottom left, so I'm just going to do a quick recenter here. I'm going to go to a larger field of view. I'm going to drag Jupiter kind of to the upper, not quite that fast. Let it do some self-drip. That's the backlash in the scope. Should stop here momentarily. Of course, it doesn't want to. It's only when you're doing a video, right? There we go. So I'm going to go back to my 480 by 480. I'm going to drag this region of interest over to where I know Jupiter was. I'm going to look down, double check frame rates. I'm going to be happy with this focus. It's not the best, but again, my scene conditions are terrible. Now I'm going to go to capture. When I do start capture, you get this. You can go unlimited or number of frames or time unit. For Jupiter, about 90 seconds is the most you want to go. If you plan on doing multiple captures and you just want to capture them in sequence, you can come here and click that. And let's do a sequence of 5 captures. Let's do 3 seconds between each one. See if we can drag that over some. Let's hit cancel. Let's figure out what's going on with this. Of course, now it's drifting to the right. So, welcome to the hobby, man. It can be frustrating. So let's fix this. Let's go to our super wide region of interest. Get your tail end over there. So now that I have it on the edge of the sensor, I'll go a little bit further and let it drift over due to backlash. Let's see if it's going to drift a little. It's going to drift up tight a little bit, so let's bring it like that. So now it's going to drift diagonally, just due to tracking errors, across my sensor like this. So now let's go back to my region of interest, 480 by 480, drag it to where we know Jupiter's at. There it is, and now that I know my optics in the scope, I've had a little bit more time to adjust to the cooler temperatures out here at night. It's 1:05 a.m. I'm going to toy with the focus a little bit more. And like I said, the scene conditions here are bad, so I don't expect any kind of miracles here. Of course, now Jupiter's doing what? Drifting to the left. Let's watch it for a second. Notice we have no leeway over here. If it continues left, we're done. So let's do a quick capture. Let's just do a single. We won't do a sequence. Let's do a limit of 1 minute and 30. And let's hit start. So your capture down here, this is the length of time. If we were doing like a 10-second capture on a DSO, this would be a 10-second timer coming down here in this green bar. But instead, we've set it to capture high speed, and we're doing 1.5 minutes. And so this is our 1.5 minute timer. Looking down here at the frames per second, we got 152 frames per second. And we're 27 seconds into our 1.5 minute capture. Jupiter's doing bad. Now look, I can actually now pan over a little bit. Look at that. See, look at that thing jumping over. So PIP, during processing, will discard the frames in which Jupiter was not wholly within the ROI or field of view, or the frame, whatever term you want to use. So I'm not too upset about that, other than we're losing some of our minute-and-a-half data. See the little jump right there is typically from PEC, periodic, what do you call it, periodic error. In other words, there's some anomaly or some little metallic burr or something on the warp drive that's driving the gear for the azimuth part of the scope, or the altitude. So, but that's what's causing that jump. And again, that stuff will either be removed or corrected during post-processing. See if we can tilt that thing. Okay, so capture is complete. It's in this folder. I can click that and go straight to that folder, which is pretty nice. I have a utility that can play SEER files, so I can double-click on it and look at it if I want to. And there it is. And I will typically, oftentimes, go ahead and I use AutoStacker 2. Yes, I know 3's out there, but I just kind of like the interface for 2 a little bit better. And I'll also call it Registax, because AutoStacker, once it's complete, will throw the file into Registax, and there you can do a little bit of more post-processing to include wavelet processing. So now I'll minimize that. Let's go to SharpCap folder on the desktop. Now let's drag that into AutoStacker. We're doing a planet, and I'm going to cover all this stuff in a different video. Frame size looks good. Let's just hit analyze, and then I'm going to minimize. And let's come back and see how Jupiter's doing. Focus is gotten a little worse. Again, some temperature variations. Let me go to the fast movement, just kind of find a rough place that I think it would be. Kind of running the AAF focuser. I think I could probably do a little more collimation too. I've spent some time collimating this. And I don't see it getting much better than that. I wish it was, and it's got the potential to, but not tonight. So notice I got a little bit of downdrift, and let's see what happens here. Let's do a sequence now. Let's go to start capture. We're going to do a sequence. Let's do 4 sequences, 3 seconds apart for a minute and a half, and just let's see what happens there. So we're capturing. Jupiter, generally speaking, is centered. Let's see if I can correct that a little bit. Clicking the pan and tilt. I like to keep it as close to the center of the crosshairs as possible. Again, PIP, that is your planetary image pre-processing, can take care of a lot of that for you, but if I can do some of it here, then that's less work that the post-processing software has to do. Meanwhile, AutoStacker has analyzed the image. There's the ones, you can see the frame where it jumped out the side there. Here's my images, and again, this is just just a rough wag to see. Let me clear these out. I'm just going to do, I don't trust this graph, and other folks online will tell you to as well. Let's just do a 40% and then get rid of these other values here. And again, we're going to talk about post-processing in another video. We're just kind of doing a generic thing. Let's find a decent frame here. Let's place the grid. Those are way too small. It's probably a little bit too big. Man, we'll go with that and see what happens. Let's hit stack. Boom. It's doing its thing in the background. Meanwhile, Jupiter is misbehaving, so let's drag it back. Again, PIP would fix that for us. Tracking obviously is a little bit off tonight. So one sequence captured, there's 3 remaining, and it did a countdown to the start of the next. 152 frames per second. Not bad. So we'll do one more. And again, the intent here is not to bore you to death with captures, but we'll just let it run through one more. Meanwhile, Jupiter's drifting up, so I'm going to click the tilt button here, and you see the ROI moving up. By the way, this is a camera-specific feature. Actually, more specifically, it is a sensor-specific feature. Right now, the software is talking to the camera, telling it, I want you to only capture using the pixels here, and of course, only dump the data from the pixels there, because these right here most likely are also capturing data, but we're only worried about what's in here. And since it's not processing any of the information from the rest of the sensor, this whole white area here. It's only capturing data and processing data from the gray area. It can therefore process it and send it to the laptop much faster, more frames per second, which is why you can get a higher frame rate if you lower the ROI. So you always want to get that ROI, or field of view, as small as possible to get the highest frame rate. And again, capture in RAW 8. And you can use binning for Planetary. Some people do. There's many discussions online on what binning is. If you're going to do it, just basically probably a 2 level is probably the best. There's another sequence. Jupiter's jumping out, and we'll go ahead and stop capture. So now Saturn has drifted out from behind a tree in my front yard. So I'm going to go wide field of view. I'm going to tell the hand controller to slew to Saturn. Meanwhile, let's go see what's up with the registacks. Nope, still stacking. So I'm going to go slew to Saturn and see how well it does there. So let's go to Saturn. You're going to see Jupiter really jump here. So the hand controller is calculating the current position of Saturn. It's asking me if I want to go slew to it, and I'm telling it yes. Scope's moving to Saturn. Now it's going to take out the backlash. Let's see how close. See if it's even in our field of view here. Again, I use those terms synonymously. Looking around here. Now it could be in this field of view. I just don't realize it. So let's up the exposure and the gain to something really ugly. I don't care what it is right now. By the way, you can see some hot pixels popping up in the camera here. So it's not showing up here, not even a glowing orb or anything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to the scope. I'm going to make sure that Saturn is in the crosshairs of the finder scope. Not too far off. So I put Saturn under the crosshairs, and I still don't see anything here. Let's up this gain a lot here and see what we got. So still nothing. So what I'm going to do now is, remember, I have the AEF controller, so I'm not going to use the hand controller to move the focus tube in and out. That would take too long. I'm actually going to take the set little thumb screws, set nuts, set screws, whatever, that are holding the 2X Barlow in the focuser tube. I'm going to loosen those and slide the focuser tube in and out, just like we did with Jupiter. So let's see what happens here, if anything. Well, there we go. A little something popped up there. So I didn't even have to do much. So let's see if we can slew that. Wrong way. Let's try it this way. There we go. There's the sombrero, right? That's what Saturn looks like when it's real bright and out of focus. But this is why, when you're hunting to put the target, your planet, in your field of view somewhere over here, you got to run this exposure and gains really up. If it was back down, down here where it was for Jupiter, you could see how dim Saturn gets, and you may have it in your field of view and never know it. And certainly if it's out of focus, you would never know it. So Saturn is what is it, almost double the distance to Jupiter, but it's a heck of a long ways out there. So we're going to have to really bump up our exposure time and our gain, typically to about 250 to 300 in SharpCap. You can see a little bit of details now coming out. I'm going to, let's just go to a smaller ROI. Let's just go to that right there. Now I'm going to work on the focus. Let me get the hand controller from the focuser. Now we're just going to play around with the focus. I'm going to go to fast speed just to get a course adjustment. Doesn't look bad. Now let's get a fine. The thing I'm looking for here for focusing on Saturn is some of the cloud bands you can discern. Sometimes on a really clear night, you can see a little bit of the dark northern hemisphere, hexagonal cloud bands. But mainly I'm focusing on the Cassini division. How sharp can I get that gap to appear? And how sharp are the rings compared to the dark background here in the sky? Let's see, what is our frame per minute? Frames per second, 100. That's not bad. Let's see if we can bring it down a little bit more. Let's go 480 by 480. And where was Saturn? I'm dragging it around to see Saturn. Now let's go back. Saturn was the bottom left-hand corner, so I'm going to have to, let's drag his tail end back up here where he belongs. By the way, it's technically Saturday, given that it's 1:17 a.m., and coincidentally, that day is named after Saturn, the god that represents Saturn, excuse me. So let's get it back here. Doesn't look too bad, actually. Let's lower the ROI, and the backlash should be out now, so Saturn's not drifting. And again, the frustrating things regarding this hobby, and these are some of the things that those of us involved in this hobby, got to deal with. Why suddenly is my scope doing this? You know. Let's see. Am I hitting anything over there? Nope. So I was checking to make sure the wheels weren't hitting. There's something going on with the backlash. Kind of moving the scope a little bit, seeing if the gears are doing anything weird. I'm going to pause this for a second, see if I can figure out what's going on. Okay, I'm back. Got Saturn to stabilize finally, so now I'm going to lower the ROI. Let's go to 600 by 600. I'm going to drag the ROI over the target, center it up, look at my frame rate. If I can get about 100 or so on Saturn, I'm happy. And see if I can lower the exposure a little bit to get even a faster frame rate. Again, Saturn, I don't want to get too dim on it because I want to pick up some of those details. Got about 250-ish or so in the gain. Now Saturn's kind of wider than it is tall, so let's pick 480 by 274. I kind of like that, 125, 130 frames per second. See if we can get a little bit better focus. Kind of in and out with the ZWO focuser. Such a beautiful planet. I remember the first time with a small little spotting scope that's used for target practice. Used for spotting where you are hitting the target, basically in competitive pistol shooting. And my granddad gave it to me because he bought a new one, and he gave me his old one. And of course, I looked at the moon and looked at Jupiter, which was awesome. But man, when I looked at Saturn, that's kind of what got me hooked. So a little grainy, so I'm going to lower the gain a little bit and see if I can up the exposure just a tad. Again, not happy with the focus. We got wildfires here. Terrible seeing. I've got a slight haze and upper level cirrus clouds. So it is what it is, but we're going to do a capture. We're not doing a sequence. We're not doing a time limit. We're going to go unlimited, and we're going to hit start. Now, given that the ROI is much smaller and Saturn is, we're going to blame it on the planet, right? Rather, my mount is misbehaving some. I really have to pay attention to keeping it centered. So I'm going to be clicking these pan buttons and tilts, and etc., to keep Saturn as close to the center of the crosshairs as possible. And this is one of the things that fire capture will do for you automatically. It will bound the planet, the target. In other words, it'll say, well, there's something bright here. Here are the edges. Therefore, I'm defining the target area as this specific area within the ROI. And it will move the ROI as required to keep the target centered. Really, really nice. And it's kind of doing exactly what PIP is doing, but it does it before it sends the data to the laptop. It's pretty impressive. So I'm just doing a capture now. I'm looking down there, doing about 67 frames per second. Sometimes it'll pause there. While we're doing this, I recommend, I don't know what these pauses are for. If you're doing this on a laptop or a computer, whatever, a desktop, but I'm certain most of you probably have laptops out here, then I will tell you that these higher frame rates that, for example, the 224 and the 290 can give you, if you've got a normal spinning hard drive, even if you've got a super fast computer, the normal spinning hard drive is going to have a hard time keeping up with the data that can come from these cameras. Maybe on Saturn, since it's only 70 frames per second, is doable and the frame size is relatively small. But when you start shooting Jupiter and certainly doing lunar, that spinning hard drive is not going to be fast enough to capture the data, and you're going to end up with a lot of dropped frames. And it will tell you down here, as soon as I'm done centering Saturn. Man, it's all over the place tonight. As you can see right here, we've lost 56 frames out of only 7,600, but the buffer feeding your hard drive, because you may not know, but the data, when it's written to the hard drive, does not go to the hard drive first. It goes to a data buffer. Sometimes that's on the motherboard, and sometimes it's in a chipset on the hard drive itself. So data goes there first, then it's fed to the hard drive. These are clouds coming through there, you can tell. And if I turn around and look, yep, got some clouds. But again, that spinning hard drive cannot receive and process and write that data and do everything it needs to do in enough time. So I recommend an SSD. It's a solid state drive. And you can use SSDs in just about any machine that could use a normal spinning hard drive. They've got adapter cables that will fit. But that is what I recommend. Oftentimes, too, I will spend all night capturing Jupiter and Saturn. And when that's the case, I better have at least about 100 gigabytes of storage available to capture all that data on my internal hard drive. Or I can bring an external hard drive out here. I do have a USB external 3.0. You got to go 3.0. And I have a 3.0 hub. If you'll watch my Planetary capturing setup video, you'll see where I show that. But I'll attach that USB powered 3.0 external drive to the hub that's actually sitting on my telescope mount, so I don't have to have it up here near the laptop. And in between captures, or while I'm capturing, let's say, my 7th image or my 7th video file of the night, I may move video file 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, 6 to that external drive to free up the internal storage space on my hard drive, especially with the SEER file format. By the way, it's another advantage of going RAW 8 is that I get a faster frame rate. Also, I don't have as much data coming through the pipe through that USB cable as I normally would, and the files are not as big if I'm doing RAW 16. They are bigger than RAW 8. So let's see if I can get this guy back towards the crosshairs. What do we got so far? Yeah, 17,000 frames, about 4 minutes. Now, there are some who will tell you that's too long for Saturn because you're going to lose details. You know, it's not like the GRS, Great Red Spot, or other cloud formations on Jupiter that'll be blurry after about 90 seconds. Yeah, there's maybe some detail that may be a tad blurred here in Saturn, but just, I don't mind taking longer videos of Saturn. I usually don't do 4 minutes worth, but look, I'm having to babysit this. So meanwhile, if this were tracking better and I could afford to just ignore it for a minute, I can go over here to AutoStacker and see that it's all done. I can go to Registack, see that AutoStacker sent the file over. I've got some preloaded wavelet settings that I can just call up. Look, we got some artifacts there, which means my alignment points were too big. I'm sorry, too small. So let's make those bigger. See how small they were, but hey, I'm willing to try that. Let's place a new grid and let's go to a stack. Meanwhile, let's go back to SharpCap Pro, and hey, Saturn's still there. So we're at 21,000 frames at 5 minutes. I don't mind that. We'll see how well it comes out. The wind is calm. That's a good thing tonight. And we'll see what comes out of this. So, folks, that's pretty much about it. There are a lot of other things here. Again, this is not a tutorial necessarily for SharpCap, you know, going through all the menu options and things like that here. It's more of how I use it. You know, what do I do? What settings do I use? And that's pretty much it. Most of this stuff, as it pops up, that's how I use it. I have used and I can do telescope control through here. So as I'm trying to slew the scope around, I can do it through here, or I can do it through the ASCOM driver, which is here. Click connect telescope. It won't because I can't find the COM port for some reason right now, but it's there. And you can also do your focusing through here too as well, as you can see. So I don't even need to run the ASCOM driver to make that happen. Let's go back up. And there we go. So we'll stop capture and we'll see how that comes out. So again, gang, thanks for watching. That is how I capture Planetary using SharpCap Pro 16-inch Dobsonian Telescope with a ZWO automatic electronic focuser. And tonight I had the ASI 290, great camera, extremely fast frame rate. I mean, I can get 350, 400 when I'm shooting Mars. And I use the a 2X Barlow on this tonight. Thanks for watching. Any questions, comments? We should all be in the business of learning, and that includes me. So if you got inputs, something that you do that you think is better or that I didn't talk about, please leave it in the comments so we can all gain knowledge in this awesome hobby. Thanks for watching. If you liked this at all, please click a thumbs up and subscribe, because I do my best to try to post some interesting tutorials, video captures, and I do things with my scope that some say you shouldn't be able to do, like DSO captures, 17 magnitude asteroid capture, Pluto, all kinds of things like that. So I try to keep it interesting. All right, thank you, and thanks for watching.